Todd, Andre, welcome to Political Hope.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
So we're talking about healing race, and this is that's a big thing to kind of dive into. I'm glad you guys have a whole discussion series going with this. But before we get there, let's jump into this first question that I love to ask all my guests, and you guys could both answer in your own unique way. What does political hope mean to you?
Todd, you like to go first?
Political hope. I think for me, what it means is the ability to work together to solve common problems, to achieve shared goals, to be able to voice differences, come to understand those differences and find a way forward based on people's different aspirations, motivations, backgrounds. Those are the first things that come to mind.
Nice. Andre, what do you feel? How do you feel about that?
Well, for me, respect and consideration, flat out. I know that there are people who will be conservative. I am someone who aligns with more liberal thinking. But, we have lost civility in the world, not just in this nation. So when I hear the phrase political hope, I want to restore civility and critical thinking.
Interesting. Like a civility. I feel like that was like a gentleman's thing, back in the days.
Yes.
But where do we really go to study gentlemanness, and civility? Like where can we even explore that? Are there avenues for that?
I think, I almost want to bring up the golden rule, right? Treat others the way you would have them be treated, or at least your family. Like you think if, especially when we're talking a lot of public policy, right? And it's so easy for us to live in our bubble. And again, I'm not speaking on one side of the aisle or the other, whether liberal or conservative, but ask yourself, if this were to impact some loved one of mine, this policy or this decision or this newspaper article or this comment, how would that be received? Would that be welcomed in my family at a Thanksgiving table? And if it's not, then it should give you some sort of pause, right? And it's just being concerned. I mean, common courtesy and respect and being considerate of one another. And this is kind of why Todd and I, came together and do this. Because if you see the show, it's all done in the confines of respect. And we disagree on some very fundamental things, but it's all done in the confines of just respect. I respect this man. He respects me.
Yeah, I do commend both of you guys. I saw some of those arguments and I was like, oh, they're about to go at it. And then all of a sudden it was like, fine. And I moved through the conversation. I was like getting excited for the dopamine release of the battle. But it's
I can deliver some of
that. Great. Yeah, I mean, but I do want to really commend both of you for leaning into those difficult conversations and that are triggering sometimes to who and what we are. Maybe they're not even us. Maybe it's some story that's been some delusion that we're attached to. I mean, pretty much everything seems to be delusionary at this point is the way I'm looking at it. But that's kind of, in what you were sharing earlier, Todd, how you said bridging the differences, right? And kind of connecting with common problems. How are you guys learning to lean into that with this work that you're doing with healing race? And as you guys are both having these conversations, how is that synthesized? How are you guys addressing common problems through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step we always take is really to understand where the other person is coming from. It's very easy in our current culture, in our soundbite culture, right, to just react to things, to hear the most simplistic version of someone's point of view, and then to react to it with regard to how it offends our own point of view. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that Andre and I, really work at doing, not always perfect, but we work hard at it, is when we hear the other person share a point of view that doesn't happen to be, consistent with our own, we want to know more, right? We want to know where that came from. What's the motivation? What are the experiences that shaped it? And oftentimes when you start to hear someone's story and the background of what led them to believe what they believe, to support what they support, there's usually some elements of common humanity there where you can get it. I mean, there's multiple instances where I was like, I get it now. right? I get where you're coming from. So an example being, really early in our conversation, Andre shared, to my surprise, I've known the guy at that point in the
25 years.
when we had that conversation,
Wow.
I had known him for 25 years. We've been close friends ever since we were college freshman roommates. He
Wow.
was one of a handful of people who went to my wedding, right?
Wow.
We had never talked about race, first of all, which was the premise of us having these conversations and recording them. And so when I started asking him questions, basic questions like, when did you know that being Black was a thing? Right? Just that it was something, that it was anything, right? And when did you first learn that maybe there was like negative associations attached to that for some people, right? When did you learn it? How did you learn it? And he expressed skepticism that he brings to, and hesitancy that he brings to white relationships. And I asked him, well, what did you worry was going to happen? Like, what were you imagining in your mind when you felt this sense of skepticism or wariness? And he expressed a basic fear for his safety and just had a lot of emotion there. I was honestly taken aback. I just, I knew this guy for 25 years and was close to him, and I had no idea he was carrying that with him. And so when we started to dig into it, the basic understanding that he has had a different upbringing than I have had. I have had an upbringing around a lot of white people. And it's not to say that Andre hasn't had an upbringing around a lot of white, a good number of white people. But as he shared, not until he went to college was it in close proximity, right? And so the people and the backgrounds and the intentions that I might know from my experience, he doesn't. And so if you imagine that some percentage, even a small percentage of people might wish a Black person ill, or that's at least, through history, what you imagine to be the case, you don't know one person to another, who's that person who wishes you ill versus the person who actually wishes you good or is just neutral about it, right? And so he had this kind of instinctive initial caution. And when I started to understand that, and the fact that we all have places in our life where we feel threatened, things in our life that bring us a sense of anxiety, and that where in our own lives, for me, it's not race, but where in my own life, I might have hesitancy, I might have felt threatened, that I would be wary as well. Then it started to make sense. And so that was a big aha moment, but it was in not hearing his fear and saying, Andre, what do you mean fear? Like, why would you feel fear, right? And questioning the basis of his fear, but trying to understand, where does it come from? Like, what is motivating it? Take me through it. And through him expressing that, I was like, yeah, I get that. I get why there would be that initial caution. So that's kind of, the basic, thrust of our approach that helps us to navigate those differences.
And my desire is to convey to not only Todd, but to the world, the emotionality behind that. So I think often when it comes with to Black people, you've seen a lot of, vitriol and protest, etc., but you don't understand the layers of hurt that are behind the generational racism and institutionalized racism upon which our country, I assume you are in the United States, was literally founded and built and fought a war over, right? And so as I walked, Todd or anyone else who has questions through my own personal experience, what it feels like to be a Black man, walking around in the United States, I want you to have a sense of the emotional, toll and the emotional baggage that comes along in every interaction, right? From a grocery store, you saw with the shooting, unfortunately, at Tops, to, in the corporate world, if you're just, trying to do your job at work, right? And when leaning into those conversations, I made a promise to myself. I said, well, if he wants to do this, then I'm going to give him the full picture, not just, the head, but also the heart and what I feel in these moments.
Yeah. And there's a really key moment, kind of even building upon and even deeper than that moment that he expressed his fear, which was kind of deep enough for me to hear, where I can't remember the exact context of the conversation, but we were talking about the basic motivation to listen to someone's story, right? Because in our world, it's easy to shut people down who we don't agree with, right? And Andre said something really profound
What if
in the
people hear your
context,
story and they say, so what?
and they say,
Mm.
so what?
And
What if
that's
they hear
what
your
it
story?
feels
And say, so
like
what?
for us. We tell you our story has been well documented, and it feels like through various things, even public policy, people are like, so what?
Yep.
Right.
It hurts. That
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of also, I was very fortunate in my US history AP. I was in AP classes. And she threw away the book, US history book, the first day of class. And I was one of those nerds. I was like freaked out, like, oh my God, how are we gonna get an A now? If she's throwing out the US history book. But then she brought in the Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. And we read the stories of people who were oppressed and people who were abused by the systems that we revere. And that completely changed my perspective because I also come from a community that's been oppressed in India. I'm from a minority in India, the Sikh people, right? And so it's been really interesting to kind of see how there's been a consistent theme of oppression. And it's funny now that oppression is happening to white folks, right? In different ways, whether it's through medical establishment or it's maybe through gender equity or all these. Now there's like a shared trauma and shared bonding, and I've never seen that window of listening ever open more so more so before than now. Like, I mean, Todd, even you being open to speaking to Andre about these conversations, I didn't feel this 10, 15, 20 years ago. Like, people were not curious,
Neither did I.
Yeah, and I will say to Andre's credit, and we had, we're bringing on guests now to have their own conversations, right? Because we want to show this is not just something that Andre and Todd can do because of their history. This is someone that anyone can do, as long as you're willing to sit down and have the respect that Andre, referred to truly get curious and be willing to listen and empathize. You can have that conversation. I think the special thing that Andre does that I think opens up the conversation is he's willing to make it a two-way conversation, right? So there are some people, some portion of the white population, whether it's, based on kind of valid understanding of, Black Americans or not, just feel fear, right? Because there are some portion of people, Black, white, and otherwise, who do shut people down, right? And those are the people we usually hear. But in my experience of people, most are willing to listen in the right context. And Andre was willing to have that two-way conversation. Like he says, even to our guests who are white, he's like, this is not about, you listening to 400
years of grievances. I tell white people this. I said, I'm not trying to like tell you off for 400 years and every Black person that ever existed. No, if we're going to do this, if we're going to, literally embody the title, and in my own healing journey with family stuff, you have to listen to the other person's side. You have to do it with an open heart and a non-judgmental perspective. And I was willing to do that with Todd.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we, we've had people who say, listen, I'm super nervous about this conversation, guests, and that understanding that it is not just a one-way conversation. It's not just you listen to, let's say, Black history and what Black people in America have experienced, but this is everyone sharing their experience based on their upbringing, so we can understand our upbringings, what led us to now, and also your experience right now. I think creates a kind of an open environment where people feel safe. And I don't want to overuse that term, because today there's all this worry about, safety, right? That we always have to feel safe. It's not that we try to avoid discomfort, right? Or difficult conversations, but we just know that there's a good faith or a set of good faith participants on the other side who make it easier, who are willing to work with us in those difficult, uncomfortable moments.
Yeah, and there's a nuance there too. I mean, as I've been more active in political spaces as well, right? Especially local governance, and how and how I'm noticing a lot of this language of safety and the diversity, equity, inclusion, all this stuff is actually being hijacked. Like it's being captured, not to create systemic changes, but to actually just perform, and sometimes even to block conversation. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced this, Andre, but there's folks in the Black and Brown community that actually use the race card as a way to not have accountability for not showing up in their best way, or maybe not showing up in their
I can
most
see that.
courageous, loving way, right? Or compassionate way.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. What I will say is what we echo on the show, we're all imperfect beings, right? And no one person is a representative of an entire group of people. And so you are going to have people who are like that. But I think generally what African Americans and Black people in the United States have wanted is respect and acknowledgement, right? For everything that's happened. And to have, to echo your title, political hope, a seat at the table, one that's fair and along with everyone else, like to really embody that diversity and that equity that literally exists in our country, but doesn't necessarily exist in our systems. And so I would counsel the world is don't pay so much attention to people who may be using like the race card in some sort of, nefarious or divisive or way. Pay more attention to people who are living their lives and who want to contribute their excellence and their best to the community, right? And as you focus more on that, we're going to engender more of it.
Yeah, I mean, what you brings up like right. There's a side of like commercializing and commercializing the race card, right? There's folks who try to make money from that, right? And then there's people like the guy who goes and speaks to I forgot what his name, but he's a jazz musician who speaks to the KKK. He like goes and befriends, right? And so like that's like two completely different polar things, but it also shows what like Daryl Davis is able to accomplish in such incredible ways, Whereas then you have the folks who kind of derail this loving movement of reconciling our differences and healing our racial differences. And I certainly.
But I also want to offer to you.
Go ahead.
I also want to offer to you. I understand those people who are holding back and who maybe aren't, who don't want to necessarily heal racial differences. I get that. Like I said, in my own healing journey, sometimes you get stuck in your field. So it is a journey for a reason. And sometimes you get stuck in position 3 of that journey where you are holding on to resentment. Like currently I'm reading 1619 Project. And when you read all of that laid out, like you're going to get in your feelings, whether you're Black or, whatever group of people, ethnic or racial group you're a part of, when you see your history, when you read it all flat out, and maybe this is really sort of, la-di-da of me, but those people are just stuck in a moment. But if you give them time, I do believe they will move to a position of, what? Holding on to the negativity is not healthy. So I need to figure out a way to move forward. And because it's only one world, we have to move forward together, meaning at some point you have to join all the other races of the world and create a thriving planet and a thriving life for yourself. So I would offer to you that those people who are maybe commercializing or using the race card in a negative way, they're only in a season of their life, but there are other seasons in the future.
Yeah, I think that's really profound, Andre. It made me think of, when you think about Daryl Davis, right? And one of the things that Andre said at some point in our conversations, he just felt the basic theme of our conversation was grace, right? Giving grace to somebody. And if you think about what Daryl Davis does with neo-Nazis and, former KKK members and, when that was more active, he gave them grace, right? He gave them respect. He didn't agree with their points of view, but he understood there was a background to it. What I sometimes worry about in the focus, and I know Daryl, and what he does is just phenomenal and amazing. And he's just an amazing human being. And sometimes people kind of point to the Daryls of the world, right, or Daryl specifically, and they forget that what he does with white people can also be done in reverse, right?
Right.
That when people are playing the race card, there are emotions behind it. And so if you're not like, why should we be willing to sit with a neo-Nazi and listen and show respect and then offer a different point of view when it's the right time, when you actually truly listen? Why should we not be doing that the opposite way with someone who might, be in their emotions because of 400 years of history as they see it, right? Or the current now as they've experienced it. And to, I've had the same experience as Andre in this way, that when you actually sit down with that person outside the moment of whatever their feelings are, if you hear them out, their ears open up, right, to hear you out. And so I think that grace can be given both ways. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I mean, I think both of you guys kind of illuminated some really powerful aspects of this, and I'm also curious to lean in. This show is also an opportunity kind of to heartstorm ideas and concepts too. It's wonderful for us to should talk about what we're doing, but also it's where we can go, right? With what we're doing, and what I'm noticing within myself, I can speak only. That's the most experiential thing I can share, right? Deeply experiential is that as I have reconnected to my roots, those roots being, Indian practices, Indian food, and especially from where I come from in India, and certain practices and traditions, I've noticed actually myself being able to face more shadows and more of those programs that were kind of negative pattern programs. I've been able to lean into those more as I've connected to my roots. And I'm curious, how do you guys imagine a part of this healing race thing that you guys are doing? How do you also imagine that connecting to the roots is a part of healing race, right? Reconnecting to roots. Some of those roots have been kind of stripped away, right?
Is an excellent question. That's an excellent question. And it undergirds my approach to the show. So like I said, if I'm going to do this show called Healing Race, then I need to know the complete history in the United States. And I need to understand how I feel about all of it. And that's what led me to read 1619, because I'm like, I have to understand how I feel about all of it. Connecting to my roots for me personally is incredibly important. I do it because I'm a cook. I do it with food. So when you talk about Indian food, I'm like, yes, that I do it with food I'm from the southern part of the United States. I'm still living here. And that's how I connect. And I agree with you. That's how I'm able to face those darker shadows, that programming. I think in a healing journey, you have to go through the tunnel to get to the light. And everyone does that at their own pace. But I think the hope is at the end of that tunnel, and when you emerge into the light. And I said on another show, you're going to like the human being you are if you go through the process. So not only am I co-hosting this show with Todd, I'm also going through this process and adjusting, and I'm changing for it. For example, I don't casually throw around the word racist anymore. Where before this show, I called everybody a racist. I literally did. I'm like, you're racist. Seriously.
Sometimes you see yourself in the mirror and you're so used to it. You're like,
what's that old adage, when you point a finger at another person and three pointing back at you? That is so true. And I've been open to say, Andre, what fingers are pointing at you, and what's going on in your mind right now? And yeah, so to answer your question, about the future and connecting to your roots, you have to connect to your roots. You have to understand how you feel about what happened to your people. But no one says, like they say in Unity Church, no one says you have to live there. So you feel the feelings and you let them pass.
Yeah, we actually have a series of conversations in season 1 where we talk about this dance and how we interact with our history, right? And to what extent do we learn from our history? Do we kind of resolve the emotions, that are sparked, from our history? And at the same time, assess the way in which our now might be different than our history.
Right.
And, listen, racial history aside, we all are products of our personal history. We all carry around narratives that have been shaped through our various experiences, and we all hit times in our lives where we go, well, what I learned 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago may not be true now, or there might be grains of truth, but also other truths I didn't see, right?
Right.
I have evolved, and the associations that I created about men or women or Black people or white people or brown people, whatever ideas I learned may not describe the whole universe that exists of males and females and Black people and white people, and right. And so we're constantly relearning and updating our thoughts, hopefully in the best possible situation, right? But I tend to be someone who looks more to the future and less to the past. And Andre has taught me a lot about the importance of the past.
And I'm the opposite. I take the past and I hold on to it and I don't let it go. So for real, I will remember something you said last August at 2:30 in the afternoon. I really will.
Oh, I got to be
And
careful
Todd
then what
is
I'm
teaching
saying.
me, you know what? Maybe you need to not hold on so tight.
Yeah. So we learned a lot. There was this whole conversation we had about pride, right? And just nice. It was just the owning of our identities. And I asked him, I was like, in the ideal world, would you call, like, let's say, discrimination and prejudice didn't exist, right? Hadn't existed in the past. In a perfect world, would we identify with the color of our skin, right? And you can watch that episode to hear more about what he said, but it evolved into a conversation around pride and what is the importance of pride. And he said, Todd, do you feel Jewish pride? And I was like, that doesn't really sit with me. It doesn't resonate with me. And I explained to him the reasons why. But I gotta say, in his description or explanation of the basis of his pride, right? It opened me up to, now don't get me wrong, as grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, I have plenty of connection to the history of Jewish people, right? And I do feel connection to my grandparents themselves as members of the Jewish population. So it's not like I have no connection, but not connection to the word, Jewish or Judaism or whatever. I mean, I don't practice, but I practice with my family. I practice culturally, right? And there was something in the way that he described it that made me more open to a kind of version of pride, at least the pride of my grandparents. Right. For what they went through and how they survived and how I exist because of them. Right. And even the people who didn't survive. Right. And had to go through what they went through. Their sacrifice kind of opened up, a whole lot of, wonderful principles in the world, right, as a result of so there, I think Andre and I balance each other a lot. And I think I have more appreciation for where our roots come from, and the importance of that.
Yeah, and it also, as you both were sharing that, it also reminds me that we need to acknowledge, scientifically speaking, epigenetics is a thing, right? We carry trauma within us, right? We carry our great-great-grandparents' trauma, but the opposite side of that, right? Which is, if that's true, that we're also carrying their resilience, right? We're carrying their songs, we're carrying their courage, we're carrying their meditations, their ecstasy, right? So we can also access our ancestors, just like Todd, you're sharing your grandparents. How much resilience did they have? How much courage, how much faith did they have to have? And that's also within you, and you can access it whenever you want. And maybe that's a part of us healing these racial divides, is actually reconnecting with those parts of our ancestors.
And I do that with food. I use recipes to do everything you just said. I do that with food. Yeah. That's how I connect to that Black resilience with food.
Yeah, it's really interesting you said that, Andre, because my grandmother used to serve us buckwheat, and buckwheat isn't something that isn't like eaten very much. And I it's not like she did it all the time, but I clearly understood that this was something that was passed down from when she was back in the Ukraine. Wasn't the Ukraine at the time as part of the Soviet Union, but
Super healthy, by the way.
But what's really interesting, super healthy, yeah. But I love buckwheat now in my older years, and I feed it to my daughter. And there is something about feeding it to my daughter that I just feel the connection to my grandmother and everyone who came before her from that time. I feel like my daughter is eating what her ancestors ate, right?
Yes.
And there's a certain emotion and power in that.
I'm going to hypothesize that also heals emotional, and that's my hypothesis, that it has subtle effects on the things that seem to be causing a lot of mental illness and frustration with our communities, right? Doesn't matter where we come from. We have a separation from that rootedness, right? And we don't understand. That's why a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists can't identify it. But there was a guy, you guys should definitely listen to his podcast a few episodes back, Daniel, who spoke about liberation psychology. And he's a psychologist that actually treats his patients, whether they're white-bodied or black-bodied, whatever, he treats them with the lens of liberation. And how when he focuses on the liberation of like getting folks to like actually be in a space that they feel like they're processing towards liberation, that a lot of secondary, tertiary problems start to dissolve in their lives, right? Whether the relationship with their workplaces or their relationship with their family or whatever. And it makes you think like, what this idea of liberation, this feeling of liberation, maybe that's also a part of us healing. Like we all want to feel free. And what does that even mean, right?
Well, it actually coincides a lot with one of the most famous psychologist to come out of the Holocaust, Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, right? And the basic premise is that there was a certain kind of resilience that came when people understood the choices that they still had and felt empowered, right, with that sense of choice, right? And choice is the thing that makes us, in some sense, feel free, right? The fact that we do have some sort of efficacy in this world, some sense of, free will, if you will, right? So that definitely makes sense to me.
It also kind of makes me think about why people become so racist or maybe so insecure in their whatever their identity is. Their insecurity of identity might come from not feeling like they have a choice. Like, I have to be a Nazi, I have to be this, or I have to.
I believe that's very prevalent right now in the culture. But I love that word liberation, and thank you for that thought. What I would say to those individuals is what you perceive as something that's a threat is actually the world trying to liberate you and engender greater connectedness, because the human race is so beautiful. And when you just, keep to your own group, whether it's just Indian people or just Black people or just white people, I didn't know you before today. Right. And this has just been such a beautiful experience for me. Honestly, as I sit here in my home, and I'm just thinking that the human race is so beautiful that racism and bias and prejudice is actually a block. It's the illusion of freedom. But when you allow yourself to just see beyond the fence, then you're going to just see so much more.
Yeah, I think the trick is, Andre and I have a good friend who we went to school with together, and she studies the use of curriculum that have people really dig into their rootedness, as you put it, really dig into the background of their identity. And there's people, and I understand this urge, by the way, there's people who wish we wouldn't focus on identity so much, right? And I can understand some of that. There is some psychology that focusing on identity as, some sort of exclusionary label that we put on ourselves that is different from others can be a source of conflict, right? Can aggravate conflict. But on the other side of it, right, if done right, it connects you with the eclectic beauty that exists, right? You going into your Indian past, right, helps you bring that out of you and helps Andre and I see it, right? Totally. And what she has found is that the study on this curriculum, what it has found is that when you dig into your identities together, different people digging into their identities, their past, but you're doing it together, not separate from one another. It is super empowering for individuals. For, you know, they do this with I think high school students, and they might do it with like early year college students as well. There's something empowering about getting back to your roots and knowing where you came from and knowing the meaning and giving the positive meanings to that identity that, to be honest, people are going to place on you at some point in your life anyways. Like, you can't run, like, you know, Andre likes to say, like, you know, he can't run from the color of his skin, right? And the fact that there are some people who are going to have negative associations, prejudices based on the color of his skin. So delving into it in a positive way and helping him bring that out in a positive way gives us the beauty of that, right? So I think it's difficult to do that in a you know, effective, healthy way. You know, there's studies around how to do that, but I also think we can't avoid it because of the potential conflict that can occur. I think we have to try to do it in the right way.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is, you know, in my opinion, Americans are some of the least educated in the world about multicultures. Like, ironically, like, the weird paradox is that we have everybody from all over the world here, yet we don't know anything. And, you know, as an Indian who wears a turban, and I come from a family that wears turbans, 9/11, so many of my family, I had my best friend got shot and killed because people were calling him a terrorist and a Muslim.
Oh, no.
And we're not even Muslim. And that's the crazy part, is our American culture is so uneducated about the diversity, right? So it's like, actually the opposite needs to be happening. We need to be celebrating more cultures every week, every month in the schools. Should be like, all right, we're going to celebrate this particular Chinese culture. We're going to celebrate this particular African. I mean, we have so many amazing cultures living in America that we can celebrate. By the way, celebrating, we could be eating their food at the celebration. We could be dancing their dance, right? And then you know, I was funny. I'm really glad we're having this conversation because I stumbled across a Frederick Douglass speech a few weeks ago during Black History Month. I was like, I was trying to like do my own re-education, and I stumbled across a speech that you can't find much online. I was like trying to find it. It was like only a few places I could find it. It was called A Composite Nation. And he gave a speech because back 150 years ago, people were complaining that the Chinese immigrants were coming, right? And there were like a whole hoopla, right, about it. And even the Black Americans were getting upset that the Chinese, right, were coming. And so he gave a speech to a bunch of Black Americans along with some white Americans. And he was like, we actually should be inviting more cultures because it'll strengthen our conviction. And if you're Christian and you're like, you're triggered by Chinese bringing their Oriental, whatever philosophies, like, then you're not a strong Christian. You know, like, if you're worried about somebody else coming in, you should be welcoming their ideas because then you can mix those ideas together. And he actually also alluded to the idea of nature and how diversity in nature actually creates resilience and actually supports. You actually
see that in forests,
right?
Forests thrive when you have different kinds of trees, not just one kind of tree.
And even gardens, right? You actually can keep pests away naturally if you have certain diversity of plants, right, growing there. And yes, as Americans and as global citizens, we need to make that needs to be like a really deeper connection. Like, oh, actually, we need that. That's actually helps us solve problems and live more safely and resiliently.
Yeah. And every culture is respected. And that's what Todd and I are trying to do through Healing Race, is to show you can sit in respect with people from different backgrounds. I mean, Todd and I have so many differences, even just outside of race, and still have a thriving relationship and create a thriving world. I mean, because this is a whole business that we've embarked upon now.
It's an embodiment too. You guys are embodying it. So really kudos to you guys. So okay. So let me spin the conversation this way. Let's say that you break, I don't know if I'm using this euphemism properly, whatever you want to call it. English is not my first language. But let's say you break out of the glass ceiling, all right? And I'm asking this both of you guys individually and collectively, right? Let's say you break with this Healing Race project, breaks out of the glass ceiling, and both of you break out of the glass ceiling, like you guys do even beyond what you've imagined before. What is happening as a consequence of this thriving in the world, individually and collectively? What's happening in 2 to 3 years? Does that make sense? Breaking out of the glass ceiling, you know, like it's.
I understand your question. I have an answer for you. Trust me.
Yeah, Andre, go for it.
You know what the 2 to 3 years, and I'll speak individually, I've let go. What that means, what I said, knowing I've let go and I'm not living in the past and living in that past pain and living through and reliving generations of pain. That me personally, I've said these things happen to Black people, to my race of people in this country, and we have far to go, but I don't have to hold on. And that means I can trust other races. I can move in spaces with other races and do that in a meaningful way. And that's what I hope will engender in the world, that we let go of that tether of like, well, no, my people were this and my people were that, and we move beyond and we just start to become one world.
Yeah, for me, I think it's in my nature to be hopeful, and maybe I do that as a psychological, support, because being hopeful keeps you going another day. But a hope is also ethereal for a reason. It's something that doesn't exist. It doesn't have groundedness yet. You hope for the things that do not exist. And I think what my kind of personal transformation will be, or what my kind of aims are for my own, personal self, is to see more of that hope become realized. I don't know if going into the fire of conflict is just part of the nature I was given as a human being, or if it's because I was born out of conflict. I was the grandchild hearing my grandparents' stories of the Holocaust throughout my life, right? And just asking more and more, and getting to see the some of the worst of what conflict can produce, right? And so hope being real to me is seeing people overcoming their concerns about engaging with one another, their whatever blocks, I guess, would prevent someone from really engaging and being in friendship with one another, right? Being in a united nation. I mean, I hate to be so, a cliche about it, and fluffy about it, but the truth is we're a mosaic of people. And I really worry about the conflict in this country.
Todd, I was thinking about you the other day. So I'm a bit of a history nerd, and I've been watching a lot of World War II documentaries, like everything, and especially the machine of the Nazis and the operation of all of that, and the logistics and how they made all of that happen. Yeah. And it occurred to me that there was literally a strategy to make sure that you would not exist. And I'm so glad that strategy failed. There was a whole machination to, like you said, hope. And you remember you told me your grandfather, he dreamed of the family he would have in the future.
That's what got him through. And that's the last question. That's the last question that's the last question I asked him in his home before he died. Wow. I saw him again at the hospital. I went through my mind, like, what did I never ask my grandfather? And I said to him, I asked him, how did you get through every day? Like, what got you through every day? And he said, I imagined the family that I would once had.
Wow. And you are that family.
That's exactly what I thought. I was like, oh my God, I exist because of my grandfather.
That gives me goosebumps.
He existed because of me, He just didn't know who I was yet. Right. And
wow. That's what we do on Healing Rays.
Goosebumps? You guys give people goosebumps?
Yeah. I mean, collectively, you asked the question collectively. I don't know, Andre, how would you answer the question collectively? Like, as a team, what do we want to do? Where are we 2-3 years from now? What makes
Oprah's bringing you on? She's like, Oprah's like, come on down, you get a car, you get a car.
I actually adore Oprah Winfrey, and I don't. I really do. What I see, like, I see this the same way. We have a mutual friend sees it, that we're talking in the context of Black and white, but there are so many other cultures that need this kind of mediation. You're from India, and I was watching a history special on Indira Gandhi, and everything India was going through that time. And then, everything India went through with respect to colonial powers, especially during World War II. I don't know many people know about this, but England got its food from India, and it caused a famine in the 1940s in India. So I see collectively this framework being used all around the world for truth and reconciliation, respect, and healing.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and it's also, important. I mean, I think you even said it earlier, Andre, and I think that's it resonates with me that this healing race conversation, its potency and its effects can kind of dissolve these trauma awarding, I've literally faced, I was a commissioner in the human relations department in a city in the Bay Area, and I'll never forget it. Like, we were all we were trying to come up with different things we could do in the community to kind of dissolve racism, right, in the community. And all the whole anti-hate kind of thing was going around. And I was like, hey, how about we start celebrating the different cultures every month? And one of the Black commissioners got offended when I started talking about how Indians have also suffered racism. And she got offended. She's like, no, we need to go first. And I'm like, I don't, it's not about first or anything. I'm just saying, like, we share it. Like, let's share the process too, to heal it. But if people own it, they're not allowing other people to share it, right? And it's we all have it, whether even you, I mean, Todd, you're sharing your Jewish community. It's been, who knows, maybe the first white people that came into existence in Africa got squeezed out themselves, and experienced the first racism on this planet. We can't really, there's no race in this race.
It's not a competition. So I self-identify as gay. And I've heard now that, many LGBTQIA plus people have, started to come into prominence and into their rights and everything. I've also heard from the Black community that it seems like we're being pushed aside now for transgender people and gay people. And I've had to counsel some of them that it's not a competition. No one has any sort of monopoly on the sympathy and gaining something because you come from some oppressed group. We've all at some point been that person.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and we're so much more powerful in solidarity, like when we actually are standing in solidarity. I mean, that's Martin Luther King Jr., maybe that's why he got taken out, literally was building the solidarity with everyone, regardless of race. So I really do commend you guys in this conversation. It's this is going to keep happening. I hope we continue this conversation. I hope I bring you guys on in a year or so from now, and then you guys give me a recap, or maybe how things are kind of flowing into this healing race opportunity. And I also welcome the conversation. If you guys ever want to dive deeper into what India and the kind of racial things that India has had to deal with, especially being influenced by the Victorian aspect of England, and how that's really kind of messed up India in a lot of ways.
It has.
Do you think it's common?
Do
you think it's common? I want to go back to something you said. Did I hear you correct? Did your best friend did you say he got shot and killed, or she, or
he did? Yep.
And was it a hate crime?
It was a hate crime. It was
God, I'm so sorry about that.
Right after 9/11. Yep.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And how do you think that experience informs your approach to this topic of engaging across, ethnic and racial difference, let's say?
right away, I didn't deal with it properly. Like, I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the community. I didn't understand how important therapy was. Right. And I took a lot of wrong, bad habits. I took on a lot of bad habits from that experience. I even stopped wearing a turban. I started cutting my hair and not cut my beard. I under-identified after that.
Yeah, because of fear, because of the fear that you would be the next another person.
It's really, it's not overt fear. It's not. Okay. And I think, Andre, I heard you talk about this on a couple of conversations. It's not like an overt fear. It's like, it's weird. You're just like, oh, I'm not going to go, like you were sharing, I'm not going to go outside for a walk because you could be that, right? It's like, it's not, it's just really underlying. It's like this underlying thing of like, I can't have a beard. And first of all, I'm going to be considered not just a Muslim, but a terrorist. That's how I can't even apply for a job. I was trying to go to medical school. How am I going to be a doctor? They're not even going to let me in. to the university. That being said, over the years, what I've been trying to reconcile with it is reconnecting with my roots and how important for our culture, we took on the role of having a turban and the beard to be protectors of everyone's sovereignty, of everyone's rights and freedom of choice. Whether you're Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, we were created to create a guardian force for others to be able to practice choice. And so I'm like, oh, as I'm getting older and leaning more into my culture, I'm like, wait, actually, I need to show up more with a beard and turban. I need to show up more with courage and celebration and curiosity, because that's why we were created. We were created to remind people that you're allowed to do whatever you want. You're allowed to be and practice your spirituality however you want. Practice your way towards thriving the way that your community wants, right? To support that. So for me, it's been a reconciliation. Even him, I think about him sometimes. He pops in my consciousness, and I'm like, oh, this is why I'm doing it, because of you. Like how happily. And I remember somebody was there when he got shot, because it was a basketball tournament we were both at, but he was on a different team, and somebody was in the shop when he got shot. It was actually a convenience store, and the convenience owner shot him. And they were saying that he was smiling and laughing, like at the silliness of being called a terrorist, right? And so I think about how important it is that we face even our challenges, even this racism. Let's face it with a smile. Let's face it with joy, because that's the one thing we have control of within ourselves is our joyfulness. So.
Yeah, wow, that's really powerful. How do you experience, I guess now over the years, how do you experience the way that you're seeing? And, a lot of the conversation, not all of it, but a lot of the conversation does revolve. I'm just going to kind of play upon what Andre was saying earlier about how we want to expand the conversation over time. A lot of the conversation is around black-white, right? There's also some stuff around immigration, and in particular immigration from Spanish-speaking countries. So there's the kind of Latino part of the conversation as well. I guess, how do you feel as a Sikh in kind of being seen in American culture, right? Because a lot of the conversation isn't around that. Now, granted, it was a big focus post 9/11, but in terms of the conversation around equity and healing and all of this, it's not typically pointed in your direction. Is I guess how have you experienced that, or how, and to the best of your knowledge, your community experienced that? Do you feel visible in the way that you would want to be? Like, what do you get the basic premise of my question? Or
yeah, totally. It's very nuanced. I mean, I'm certainly a little bit more spiritually aggressive with how I show up, the way I show up now, because I carry my community's principles and virtues and values with me into any space I go to. Really aggressively, spiritually aggressive, right? But non-violently. What is it called? What is that thing? Remember after MLK went to see Gandhi's ashes, he came back and he's like, we need to be physically nonviolent but spiritually aggressive. So again, kind of practicing that in the sense. But for me, I still get people calling me Muslim or Hindu, or I still get people kind of calling, like, I've had people come up to me and whisper in my ear, like, are you a terrorist? And like random strangers, right? When I'm wearing my turban. So I do have these things, and I'm starting to laugh at it when it happens more than when I was younger. I would get triggered by it. On the same sense, I still notice that, like, when I show up in a political space or a nonprofit space, those spaces are not really inviting the other philosophies of how you can show up, right? Because like the Sikh community shows up, right? Whenever there's a disaster, they show up, right? We show up. Yeah. Whenever there's like a war, we'll be feeding both sides of the war, right? It's all over the world. This is a consistent pattern with the Sikh communities. Even during this pandemic, when everybody else closed their doors, all the churches closed their doors, the Sikh community, including my family's community, they opened their doors even to essential workers, even non-citizen. Essentially, they were like giving out food for free during the pandemic. And so for me, I feel like that spirit doesn't ever get invited to the table when we're talking about, healing race or healing communities, or maybe even helping communities thrive. we're not often allowed, even in the conversation, is like as a different philosophy that
Mm.
exists, that currently not something that existed 5,000 years ago, but like,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
example,
no, I know. What's the name of it? Yeah, there's a certain word. So I happen to have, just by chance, a friend who studies. Her background, I think, is in anthropology. She
cool.
studies the Sikh community in India,
Oh,
and she's studying. What's the word for the kind of service orientation that you have in the Sikh community?
well,
There's like a word.
we have seva.
Seva, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And so she's studying, interestingly enough, it relates to this conversation. She's studying the way that Seva, did I say that right?
Yep, perfect. Yeah.
That Seva changes, that the practice of it changes other people's views of the Sikh community through seeing that service,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's kind of the basis of her research. So anyways, this is all to say that it seems to be a kind of like in the basic, most fundamental ethos of the Sikh community is what I've gathered.
It's also proactive race healing, right? And the way I've noticed that even myself, like as I show up in volunteering spirit, I just recently volunteered. I'm in Hawaii right now. I went and volunteered with a group of teenagers. It was a leadership kind of thing where we bussed in a bunch of teenagers from all across the island, and it was a leadership camp for like 3 days. And I wore my turban and my beard, and some of them had never met an Indian, let alone like a Sikh before, but they asked questions, and I was volunteering. So it's interesting how like showing up in a volunteer spirit also allows people to ask questions, to be curious in a safer space. It's not, people are getting supported, so then they're going to be more curious. Okay, where are you coming from? Like, what's your deal? Are you Muslim? Are you this? And you're like, oh no, this is what we are. And it's like, oh great, okay, cool. Can you come back again? you know, um, especially when you're feeding people. By the way, Andre, like when you feed people as a part of your
Yes.
seva, people love you.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
but certainly thanks, Todd, for asking that question. It reminds me how important it is also for me to honor my friend, and so many other people have lost their lives in this space, that actually, that loving, showing up with love and courageous love, that is one of the most powerful ways to reconcile differences and reconcile hate or reconcile insecurity or whatever these weird things are that make people hurt each other, right? It's like if we show up in that courageous love, oh man, anything is possible.
I agree.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, okay, before I let you guys go, is there anything else you want to share with the audience? Is there any other comments or anything? I want to make sure you guys feel complete.
Follow us on YouTube and watch the episodes in their entirety, because trust me, it gets better.
Yeah, there's a story that unfolds. And I would also say we're welcoming guests. So if folks want to join us for kind of an open, real, constructive conversation about race, we are trying to, our goal is to normalize and spread these kinds of conversations, right? Between, human to human, humans to human, right? Sharing experiences. And we want to kind of lower the taboo and stigma around having, or the concerns and worries about having these conversations, right? Because if we're holding back from conversations because we worry about the blowback we're going to have, first of all, there's a lot of relationships that just never get to happen. So just from a purely personal, rewarding point of view, a lot of relationships that don't get to happen. Additionally, how are we ever going to move forward, right? Given the multicultural, reality of this country, how are we going to move forward if we can't even talk about the elephant in the room, right? So we hope to do that, and so you can see us on our videos, but you can also come experience it with us, right? And that's our greatest hope, is that people will come and experience it with us, and or they'll start to have conversations in their own families, in their own living rooms, in their own, in their own relationships, even just random conversations that you have. Andre, has now made it a practice to, share what he does at bars, and it opens up conversation about race, some pretty like profound stories, right? And I've started to follow his inspiration as well. I think the more we allow these conversations to happen in random places, right, with random people, the more we see, wow, there's some deep stuff here, and there's a lot of rewarding, relationships to be had.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you were even sharing that, I was imagining a healing race tour through the United States, where you guys are stopping at different places.
We've
We're
imagined that.
imagining that as well.
We have imagined that. Yeah, we'd love to do that. We're in the beginning of thinking through what that could look like.
All right. Well, as the listeners who are listening to it are also imagining it now, so that gives a little bit more oomph to it.
Coming to a city near you, Todd and
Yeah.
Andre. And believe me, I will give you a show.
And I'll bring the Indian food.
Yes, obsessed. Yes.
Awesome, guys.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you both. Thank you.
For having us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having us on. We really enjoyed the conversation.
Take care.